Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today I don't want to talk about a specific book that I read, but rather I want to do the usual wrap-up and TBR as September has come to an end. And I feel like I read a bunch of high-quality books in September, although some things that I thought might have had a bigger impact on me and I thought were going to be super great actually turned out to be not as good as I expected. I do think that other books had more of an impact on me, which is always nice. You know, it's just sometimes those books that come out of left field and you don't think are going to be as impactful turn out to be even better than you were expecting. In terms of October, I do want to read a bunch of spooky things in October. I got some short stories planned, as well as some poems that I have lined up that I want to talk about, and some books. But it feels like there's just like one book missing that I can't quite put a name to. But perhaps I'll find it, as I travel along through October, and hopefully we'll be able to find a book that is particularly spooky that might interest me. Without further ado, let's talk about the wrap-up and TBR. I'll do the wrap-up first, of course, followed by the TBR, and we'll move on from there. So in terms of the September wrap-up, what books did I read? I finished up Blood Meridian in September. I started it in August. It was a pretty hefty book that took me a little bit to read, but I thought it was pretty great. That was my first encounter with McCarthy. And I thought it was a pretty interesting book, a lot worth talking about, and a lot that I did not talk about within the video itself, particularly as it relates to the judge, particularly as it relates to the sort of Western revisionist style that he was using, neo-Western, talking about the illnesses, or not the illness, but the more realistic view of the West that people typically gloss over when they talk about it. So definitely a book worth pursuing if you were looking for something from McCarthy that you might not have read before. I also read The Tombs of Atuan by Ursula K. Le Guin, which I thought it was fine. I really wanted more from it, especially given how quality that the Wizard of Earthsea was. And all that emotion in the book, and I felt like that wasn't there. It definitely felt like sort of a character introduction to the princess in this story, which is fine. It's not a bad thing, especially if this is going to serve the rest of the books in the series. But I still wanted more from it. It didn't seem like a strong enough follow up to the first Earthsea book. I also read Volume 1 of the Saga of the Swamp Thing by Alan Moore, which I thought was a lot of fun. I particularly enjoyed the first half of the book that focused more on Jason Woodrue and his sort of his villain role in the series, as well as the exploration of identity and all of that from the existential crisis that Swamp Thing was going through. In the second half, the villains weren't as compelling, and the story was kind of forgettable. But hopefully in Volume 2, which I'm reading, it's part of the BookTube challenge from Lucas over at the Bits of Lit. Hopefully that'll be even more fun, and we can see some more of Alan Moore's traditional sort of like introspective, really like thought-provoking type of writing there. I also read What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat by Aubrey Gordon, which I thought was pretty informative. It certainly let me know more about fat phobia and the need for more fat justice as it pertains to the healthcare industry and the wellness industry and all of those things. That was part of the book club read for the month of October or September with my friend Bevan. So kudos to her for selecting another very informative book. Hopefully the book club, which is still very limited with me and Bevan, for the month of October is just as quality. I also read Breaking Glass. It was a Harley Quinn sort of origin story, which I thought was a lot of fun. Some of the themes that she was working with, the author in particular, wasn't as good as it could have been, especially talking about like the oppression by the rich and what the people with money, how they often gentrify areas and make things more difficult for the poor and the working class. But I thought as a Harley Quinn story, it was a lot of fun and definitely worth checking out. I also read The Quitter by Harvey Pekar, which I thought was mostly boring. It was just about Harvey's own life and how he never really tried to accomplish things and always sort of gave up until he reached a very crucial moment in his life. Not very interesting, not really worth checking out. I just found it at my local library, and I'll probably quickly forget about it as time goes on. I also read A Burning by Megha Majumdar, which I thought it was one of those books that I mentioned earlier that was very thought-provoking and was much more interesting than I thought it was going to be. I checked it out from random at my local library, and so it was fun just being exposed to this very interesting story about how justice, like when we try to find justice, we often seek out scapegoats, and the justice system often doesn't work for immigrants or those who come from a poorer background. And sometimes right-wing political parties will make a name off those scapegoats. A lot of interesting ideas that she's working with, and I would like to see more from Megha Majumdar because this book was so fascinating, and it was her first book. So hopefully, if her writing evolves and whatnot, it'd be great to see what she writes down the road. And then I also read Augustus by John Williams, which I thought was a good book. It was very interesting. It had that classic John Williams writing, but it felt like it was missing something ultimately. And what I think it was is it's a problem with the nature of the book itself. With him focusing on historical characters, there's only so much you can do, and only so much you can work with. And the plot and some of the elements of the characters and whatnot, they didn't really click with me, and so it didn't really have the same impact that Stoner did, which I thought was possibly one of the best books that I've ever read. So, and I was really hoping for the same with Augustus, but I understand that's probably not going to be the case with all of John Williams's works. I also read a number of short stories for the month of September, including Casa Tomada, which was a short story from South America, which I thought was toothless horror. The author, whose name I'm forgetting, he wrote it as a means of kind of also serving as a metaphor for the state of things in Argentina, and so because it worked like that, it also didn't really work as just general horror, which is what I was looking for. I didn't really know so much about the other Argentina things going on. And then I also read Repent, Harlequin by Harlan Ellison, which I thought was probably the best short story of September. Just a very fascinating story about an oppressive society, a very fascist, totalitarian society, and how the methods you need to go about in order to disrupt it, and disrupt it in meaningful ways in order to bring back less totalitarian elements into that society. It was I in the video I compared it to Kurt Vonnegut in his short story Welcome to the Monkey House, which was pretty awful, and a lot of people weren't happy with me saying it was awful, but it is not very good, and it's not really worth reading. But like everything that was discussed in that one shows up in Repent Harlequin and is done in a better way. So very interesting to see two authors talk about the same thing, but one author clearly having more of a solid idea of what they want to say and saying it in a less problematic manner. Then I also read The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Gilman, which I thought was a really good short story, getting at the horror of horror and feminism, those kind of ideas, doing what all good horror should do, and making a commentary on the nature of the society in which it takes place. A lot worth exploring there. I definitely recommend that you go seek it out. I don't want to say too much else more about it because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. And then I also read Closing the Sea by Judith Katzier, which was awful and should be immediately forgotten about. And yeah, it's just poor writing, bad stories, not really much to say about it. And the sooner I forget about it, the better off my life will be. So, pretty awful short story collection there. And then I read a number of poems, which you can check out in my Poetry Thursday videos. Go take a look at that if you want to find out more about, what I had to say about various poetry. Now in October, what is my TBR for that? Well, it's all horror themed, or mostly horror themed. I think there might be some non-horror books that I've checked out from my library that I'm going to talk about, but mostly it is horror or spooky themed. There, in terms of books, like I want to read Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, which I've already started to read. I'm about 50 pages in, and it's a pretty interesting and unusual story. It's fascinating because I read Fahrenheit 451 by Bradbury, and I'm also reading this now, and it feels like it was written by two completely different authors, which is interesting how the one author can have like two different voices. Because, like, for example, every time I read a Steinbeck story, it feels like it was definitely written by Steinbeck, for better or worse. But with this, it just feels like two different things. So, already kudos to the author for doing that. I also want to read Swamp Thing, Volume 2 by Alan Moore, which is again part of the ongoing BookTube challenge from Lucas over at the Bits of Lit. Go check out his first video on Swamp Thing if you have not done so already. We both clearly like the same elements, and we have problems with certain elements, but I expect that will change as time progresses. I also want to read The Sentence, which is Bevan's recommendation for book club this month. Whether or not we actually read for book or meet for book club is one thing, but I definitely plan on reading this, and it's apparently a ghost story. Don't know too much else about it, but I usually can't be steered wrong with Bevan recommendations. I also have a number of comics planned, and a random selection from my local library. Be on the lookout for that. And I also want to try to get to Stardust by Neil Gaiman. I've read quite a bit of Neil Gaiman already, and this seems to be another one that I haven't read yet, so be on the lookout for that. That might come out later this month or early November. That remains to be seen, depending on the time it takes me to read everything else. I also have a number of short stories planned for the month of October, including Edgar Allan Poe, and a short story from, I think, Nathaniel Hawthorne, who I haven't talked about in quite some time. So be on the lookout for those short stories. And then I have a number of poems planned as well, that are all spooky themed in some way, including by Shel Silverstein and a couple of other notable authors. So can't wait to talk about those poems. And that really seems to be what I have planned thus far. If you have any recommendations, let me know. For the month of October, I do want to read more horror, but I don't really know where to start. There feels like one book that is missing. If somebody could just throw out recommendations.
You need look nae farther, Mr. Nothing.
Zooks, it is the Loch Ness Monster, an old friend from my days where I hosted radio. What are you doing here? Do I owe you money? Are you here to share the best recipes for Cullen skink?
No, lad. Well, I would be delighted to share my knowledge of Scottish cuisine. I'm here for other reasons. It seems like you're needing a spooky book recommendation for October.
Indeed I am. What does the Loch Ness Monster suggest?
As a creature of the deep, I wish to recommend to ye a book that focuses on water-based Lovecraftian horror. Mr. Nothing, I challenge ye to read The Fisherman by John Langan.
I am unfamiliar with the author, but I do know that the book in general won the Bram Stoker Award in 2016 thank you for this, and I look forward to reading this in October. Anything else I should know?
You do actually owe me money. Give me back that $2.50 I gave you so you could run your lemonade stand.
Oh, sorry, connectivity issues. Goodbye, Loch Ness Monster. Anyway, that is what I plan to read in October and what I did read in September. If you have any suggestions for me, much like the Loch Ness Monster, put them in the description below. I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can make recommendations for October or just simply find out, what books I've read and seek them out on their own. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and October-y travels. Farewell.